Okay.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to yet another Conversations with Authors. Today being a very special one as we congratulate Bisi on publication day of this beauty, Daughter in Exile. Bisi, thank you so much. And she will be in conversation with Ayesha Harruna Attah, who we love. And I will just read the bio that is at the back of the book. Bisi Adjapon is the author of the critically acclaimed novel, The Teller of Secrets. Her work has appeared in the McSweeney's Quarterly, The Washington Post, Miss Magazine, Al Jazeera, The New York Times, and The Guardian. She has won the Foreign Service Award for Human Relations and an Excellence in Teaching Award. She divides her time between Ghana and America, which is a central point of this wonderful novel. And she is in conversation with a beloved author, Ayesha Harruna Attah, who is a Nairobi favorite because of the 100 Wells of Salaka. And each one of your books, all of them, well, I guess Ayesha, other than the first two, are available at Cheche Books, Daughter in Exile, and a book that has people coming back into our store all the time, The Teller of Secrets, and we can't get enough of your work, Bisi. Thank you so much. Ayesha?
Thank you, Ndegwa, for this beautiful introduction. How are you doing, Bisi?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And you, my friend?
Okay. I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I feel like the last time we had this conversation, the conversation was when? In person, it was in Ghana?
It was a virtual one.
Okay.
During the pandemic, I think.
Okay.
I think that was
this might be a fourth conversation.
We had a conversation. What do you call it? The
Deep Blue Between.
One of my favorite novels. We had a conversation together at Point Back.
So this is our fourth conversation. We had the first one was you came to Dakar and I interviewed you. And then the second one was the virtual conversation, third in person, and now another virtual conversation. So we've come a long way. And this is your second book, your sophomore release into the world. How are you feeling?
I feel wonderful. I mean, it's kind of nice because I didn't have the anxiety that normally you would have with a second book because I wrote this one first and it was just languishing, and I just took it out and polished it after, the Teller of Secrets.
So you just mentioned that you wrote this one first. How did that happen? How do you go from writing this book to publishing another book and then coming back to it? What's the process there?
Well, when I first published, let me just go back. When I finished writing the Daughter in Exile, actually, I wrote it way back in 2010 or something like that. That's when I wrote it. And when I submitted it, agents were excited about it, but publishers were not excited. They felt that it was a bit too early. They felt that nobody would be interested in a book about immigration, which by nobody, I guess what they meant was maybe the West, because immigration is something that has interested us in Africa. We have often had to, for various reasons, immigrate to the West, whether it is to study or to visit family or simply to go on vacation or because of necessity, war, or something like that. So we've always been interested in knowing how our people feel when they have lived in a foreign country. But I guess they don't really count us when they say most people. And so I was rejected, and I think I was rejected by perhaps about 30 publishers. So I said, you know what, forget about it. And I put it aside, and, I wrote The Teller of Secrets more as an experiment. And to my surprise, that's the one that found immediate success. Well, not quite immediate, but success.
But yeah, it was picked up by first a Nigerian publisher, and then picked up by Random House or HarperCollins. Sorry, it was HarperCollins, right?
Yes.
Okay. And what what's the difference? You talk about this one being more of like an experiment. Do you find a difference in the way you wrote both books?
Well, I think that when I wrote The Teller of Secrets, it was intended to be just a short story. As a matter of fact, the first 3 chapters, I believe, were a short story. And I wrote it to show Dave Eggers that I could write, because I had met him and he had offered to help me. And I just wanted him to see a sample of my writing. And to my utter surprise and delight, he picked it up and he loved it, and he decided to publish it in McSweeney's. And it was also the very first time I had ever written anything in a present tense and in a child's voice. So I was having fun with it. And so when an agent read it and wanted to know if there was more, I said, sure, there was more. In fact, I was lying, but I immediately said, let's see what could happen to this girl. And I just started writing, and she read the first 50 pages and said, oh, this is great. Do you have any more? And I said, yes, I do. And I did. And so within 2 weeks, I had a first draft done because I was under pressure to get something out there. And I had so much fun. I didn't have time to think, oh my God, will somebody like it? Oh my God, what am I doing? I was just having so much fun, and there we have it. And so when that got published, I thought, okay, maybe it's time to, besides, after I think I finished writing the Daughter in Exile, not too long after that, I've forgotten what year, Chimamanda's Americana came out, and it was very successful. And the way I thought to myself, there you go, you see the West, they wait for something to be successful, then everybody jumps on the bandwagon. So I thought to myself, well, since her novel had done well, why don't I pull my out and polish it? And which is what I did. I polished it, and I had as a matter of fact, because I had polished it, when my agent submitted Teller of Secrets, she also submitted Daughter in Exile to HarperCollins. And so it came as a 2-book deal. And that is how come it's being published so quickly. Yeah.
Okay. And did the experience of publishing the Teller of Secrets, of writing and publishing that book, influence the way you edited Daughter in Exile? Or were you able to do them separately? Did you pick things up to help with the second book?
I think it was completely separate, because this was written in an adult's voice and in a typical traditional narrative style. You have, it starts at the beginning and it goes on following a chronological order if you take away the prologue, so to speak. And so there was a clear narrative arc, whereas The Teller of Secrets was more of streams of consciousness novel, where we are going through the thoughts of a child. I'm sorry, let me go ahead and put my phone on airplane mode so people stop WhatsApping me. All right, so I found that the process was entirely different. The other thing too was that I think I was pushed more to delve into, I think that with a child's voice, you get to, a child doesn't think that deeply about things, so that was very easy.
There is a child here who wants to say hi to his mother, so let's bring him in quickly, and then he can go back out. Come, quick. Come quickly. And then you can be quiet. I don't know, he wants to do his thing.
Okay.
He just got back from school. All right. Hugs. All right. Bye-bye.
There you
have a snack and everything. So
all right.
Hopefully we get through to the next hour. Fingers crossed.
Oh,
so yeah, go ahead.
We should, and we are family, we'll work it out.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's, so it was entirely different. And this one I was dealing with heavier issues that required a lot of thought, a lot of really, I like to quote this phrase by Erica Young: writing is very easy. All you have to do is take a pen and open a vein. That is
yeah.
So I had to live through a variety of trauma and emotion, at the same time humor and love and laughter. So it was quite challenging. It was different. It was different.
Okay. I think it'll be a good time to have a little reading from Daughter and Exile to give the audience a taste of your work. Maybe we can split it up into like 3 short readings. So this will be the first one.
Sure. Let me start off with, let's see, where shall I start?
Put my phone on mute, so.
Okay, so yeah, I will start with the prologue, if I may. Sisa Usuban, change your character. May 2007. After the trial, I will no longer be a woman without a country. I'll either live legally in America or be deported back to Ghana within 6 months. I welcome either choice. I'm weary of peripheral living. I've never voted in my life. When I was growing up in Ghana, the voting age was 21. By the time they changed it to 18, I had already left. In America, I pay taxes but can't vote. I'm a skeleton of a resident without the flesh of belonging. I've been up since 3 a.m. The letter my mother wrote a week ago lies unfolded on my bedside table. I've read it so many times that even when I close my eyes, I can still see the looping cursive swimming before me. February 9, 2007. Letter from mother. My dear Equia, it is a pity that you have not seen fit to write to me, your mother, for such a long time. I hope you are doing well. As for me, I'm nearing the end of my life. Now my hair has hoary streaks. I'm afraid you may never see me again. I don't know if you hold the nuggets of wisdom I tried to impart to you through those adinkra symbols of our Akan people. But I cling to the hope that you're living a good life. I pray that the Almighty God takes care of you and keeps you safe when I'm no longer here. Your loving mother, SD. 10 years. That's how long I've been away from home.
That was beautiful. I love the way you read, Bisi. It's just, I remember the first time I met you at Pidja Festival in Accra. You were reading so beautifully. I love it.
Thank you.
So we talked a little bit about when you wrote the book, but let's talk about why. Why was this the first book that came to you, and how did it come to you?
So this started in Virginia. I remember very well, it was after church. And I had been to this church that had an international group. And I used to resent the group in a way because they would have somebody who had traveled from Ghana come and do a
where they called him out. They mentioned, first of all, they read a list of
okay, that's great. This is bringing back memories from during the pandemic Zoom call.
Yeah. So what was I saying?
You went to a church.
And what they would do would be they would have Americans who had traveled to Ghana come and do presentations about Ghana. And here I was, a Ghanaian, and nobody asked me to do a presentation. So I went to them and asked if I could talk about Ghana, and they said no. And I was quite upset about it because I felt, I mean, who better to talk about Ghana than a Ghanaian who would be able to put things in proper context. And so this lady was actually from that international group. And I was standing with a friend whose husband, I think she herself worked for the World Bank. And the woman just came in and said hello. And then the first question out of her mouth was, what are you doing here? I mean, after I made introductions, you know, so what are you doing here in America? And I always found that kind of question a little intrusive because I knew what was coming next. And sure enough, the assumption was that she must have fled war or famine or genital mutilation or something to come to America. And so I realized that there was always this misconception that if you were an immigrant, the only reason for coming there was either to study or to escape poverty, to escape war, or to escape some kind of political struggles. And it really irked me. Another time I was shopping and the person said, "Oh, I like your accent. Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Ghana." She said, "Aren't you glad to have escaped all that war?" And I said, "Ghana has never had any war." And she said, "Oh, well, I just don't like to go abroad. And no, it's all this." And so I had this yearning to talk about a middle-class Ghanaian African who came to America, not to study or anything, because there's so many reasons why people come in, but I wanted her to be well educated, to come from a good home, which is why I made her mother a judge, and to find herself in America because of certain circumstances. And in her case, it's because of romance, right? And how easy, because I understood, I myself had gone through the immigration system and I knew how tough things were. And I had seen so many people go through immigration issues. I've got family friends, and I've got this friend, a particular family I befriended. Their father worked for the UN, for instance. And I mean, they all had various issues and people would just treat them with such disrespect. So I wanted to show how easy it was to fall into all kinds of dire situation in America and to be from a different background than what people expected. And that is why I just decided I was going to write this book.
And where did you write it? Did you write it while you were still in the US or you had moved back to Ghana? I'm interested in like where one feels the most compelled to write a book, and we can stretch the question into the geography of the book. It starts off in a city we both love and hate at the same time, Dakar, and then we end up in the US. So why set it in Dakar to begin with also? So where did you write the book and why did you choose these two places to set your book?
Okay, so I actually started writing the book in 2006. When I came to Ghana to live for a while. I had started before in the US, but I wasn't sure what kind of book I wanted to write, what direction I wanted the book to go. And besides, you know, working full-time as an international affairs specialist, traveling and with a full schedule, I had no time to write. And now I found myself, well, I moved to Ghana and I wanted to stay in Ghana for a while, and I stayed for about 3 years. So while I was in Ghana, I think it was actually 2005, while I was in Ghana, I said to myself, okay, I'm not working for a whole year. I took a whole year, or was it 2 years of not doing any work. So I thought, why not write? And so that's when I started writing. It's interesting how being in Ghana and remembering who I was before I left Ghana, remembering the kinds of people who live in Ghana, who live in Nigeria, who live in Senegal and in various places in Africa, the kinds of well-educated people, I started to look at the lives that immigrants are leading in the United States and wonder, you know, why don't you just come home? And that is when, you know, the story started forming itself. And then I just started, you know.
Felt that. I felt that, like in Dakar, Lola was alive. She was, you know, she had this really rich group of friends, sometimes who annoyed her, but she was living, and she was radiant, you know. And then she gets to the US and it's relentless. And that was a question I had, Luna, why don't you just go back home, you know? So that you represented really, really well.
Yeah, and it was shocking to me, actually. Not shocking because I could understand, but the stubbornness with which people would not go home. I remember one particular gentleman I knew who had a nervous breakdown, and it took family members to come and get him. I remember another person that I knew, it was a woman, and she also had a breakdown. And my thoughts was always, you know, understanding the stigma. And we who live in Africa, and I'm probably, you know, getting ahead of myself here, we don't realize, I think we take the walls that hold us up for granted. We have so much. I mean, if you're hungry, you can time your visit to somebody's house when you know the person comes to eat.
Yeah.
And chances are the person will
It's true. It's so true.
If you're broke, it's so easy to ask somebody, hey, can you give me a little loan and pay back? Chances are that you will always have a place to stay. I mean, even if you're not treated the best in a family home or something, there's always a couch, there's always a place you can stay. And so seeing that, and then at the same time, so you have all this support, cultural support, emotional support, you've got people holding you up, and you have no idea how hard it is. It's only when you go abroad and those walls that hold you together are suddenly pulled away from you that you realize, you don't even realize it, you become disoriented and your values change. You start to think in ways, there are things you do when you are outside the country that you would never in a million years do in your own country.
Well, let's talk about Lola, since we're talking about things that people do, and she's this person who puts herself in this situation. Tell us about how did she come to you, this specific person? She was so sweet. And I read online, and I think my own words about your book was, I was rooting for Lola. And that's a word I saw come up a lot, like in reviews. We were rooting for Lola. So how did you paint her, and just go into your process a little bit? Why this one character versus anybody else? How did she come to you, and how did she come to you, and why did you pick her? Sometimes
because I wanted to promote understanding between the cultures, it was important to me that she be a nice person, not just somebody who was intelligent or coming from a good home. It was important for me to create somebody that people would like, and therefore would find difficult to just dismiss as just another immigrant looking for a handout or something like that. And also some of the things that she went on, as you said, she went through a lot of stuff that you would say was relentless for some time, at least for a period. It seemed as though anytime she caught a break, something else would happen, and you were always waiting for the other shoe to drop. So if you didn't like her, you might just abandon her at some point. So I wanted to create a likable character, somebody who refused to lose her dignity, even when things were really bad. She refused to lose her dignity. And that is what I wanted to create. She was not perfect. We saw some of her decision-making, well, you know, not the wisest thing. And she did, you know, make some mistakes, but she was, and again, a perfect person also would be very boring. I mean, what kind of story will you have if somebody is perfect? And so it was important for her to be a flawed, but very likable character. And that was what my intention was.
Okay, I'm gonna dig in some more, just in case there's some people listening who are like students of writing or who want to improve their craft. How does one create a likable character? What are some of the things that you consciously chose to do to bring Lola alive?
So when I think of a likable character, I think of somebody who is nice to others, not deliberately mean, somebody who has some values that we can respect. You know, for instance, there is a place where she refuses to take advantage of old people, for instance. When you have your life is on the line, some people would excuse it. I remember a book that I read and I had a hard time with it because they justified why, the author justified why this person would continue. This was a pretty decent person, would continue to exploit people, and there was no remorse ever anywhere. So when you're creating a character, you want somebody who is balanced. The person doesn't have to be morally, because, you know, she's not the saint, as I said, but you need to just create the kinds of values that you respect. And I guess it differs from everybody. So I created and I gave her values that I respect in people. And also, you know, somebody who is a straight shooter. But at the same time, I needed her to make mistakes so that she could get into trouble, so she could not be perfect. So you need the person to have at least one or two flaws. And in her case, the determination to have enough money to come home so that she can impress her family, so that her family will respect her, so that she wouldn't have to stay with her mother. In other words, she was unwilling to humble herself and just come home with her tail between her legs, right? So you need somebody with at least a justifiable flaw. That's the way I saw it.
Okay. And I guess also one of the things that helps us see Lola is her relationship with other people. So there's an ensemble of other characters, some of whom are antagonists and some of whom help her. And there are a lot of people. How did you keep track of your characters? Do you plan them? Did you tell us about that.
So there were
a lot of
characters
people on her journey.
Yeah, there were characters I knew were going to be there for the long haul, like Olga, like Mindy and Ted. And those characters, though, you know, they come in and out, it's very important. Even somebody like Rob, it's very important that those characters be introduced very early. So right at the beginning, I had, you know, and I'm going to read a little bit from that particular chapter.
Okay,
where
after this, you can go ahead and read.
Yeah, we get to meet these characters. And we know that a couple is going back to America. And we sow the seeds that she might actually wind up in America. We're not quite sure, but their seeds are there. So the people who are going to be important and be there for the long haul, it's important to introduce them early and find ways to kind of connect every once in a while, link with them, like, you know, how Rob appears here and there and there and there. And then, of course, there's characters who are just there to either create an obstacle or something, and those are minor characters. So with them, what I did with the minor characters was that I charted the journey. And I knew that there is going to be this lawyer who is going to come in and do this, and that creates a situation. So those were characters that I decided were going to be short-term. They were just going to come in and out. But the important characters, the main characters, those I knew I needed to string them along. But, you know, life is a journey. When you are in a situation like she was, and if you've ever read, there's so many books out there, but I remember Patsy, for instance. If you have a situation where a person is forced to move from place to place, forced to change jobs, then that means that you're going to have different characters coming up in the places that she has to live, in the places that she has to work. And so I had all those lined up, and they were like, you know, I had the scenes and I had the characters mapped out. And so, you know, I just slotted them in as was needed.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead and read the section that you were just telling us about?
Oh, yeah, let me. I'm very excited. So this is 1995, before America. Ese ne tekrema, the teeth and the tongue. You could say I entered America while living in Senegal by way of my American friends one evening in a house near the sea, filled with the smell of salt, flowers, alcohol, perfume, tobacco breath, and pheromones. Americans had crossed my path, but never this many in one place. Olga's house boomed with their loud conversations. They circulated, fixed smiles on their faces, clutching wine glasses, bending over to reach for crackers and cheese laid out on the wicker table in the center of the room. They didn't sit. They didn't break into merengue, despite the supposed Congolese music thumping in the background. At 21, I was a fresh university graduate. Everyone else was above 30 and married. I was the only African, one of 3 Blacks. The other 2 were a couple whose masculine half was laughing louder than anyone else. Olga had introduced him to me as Len George or Leonard George, a man with a smile so broad his teeth seemed to begin at one ear and end at the other, strong and white. His wife, an oak-colored woman with green eyes and cotton ball blonde afro, formed part of a clump of people complaining about Senegal. Can you believe it? The houseboy was playing with my son's toy car. This was delivered with round-eyed indignation by a blonde. A collective no arose from the group. They spurred one another on. They are so unbelievably lazy. And the weather, talk about the heat. I know. And then suddenly it gets cold and there's no way to keep warm. No heat when it's cold. No AC when it's hot. Jesus Christ. Get me out of here. That's what I say. Back to DC, back to civilization. They groaned, avoiding my pointed stare. I had a good mind to retort, is life perfect where you come from? But I was reluctant to ruin Olga's going back to America party. From behind me, a shrill voice announced, I love it here. That was Olga, striding toward the complainers. My heart warped over. She stood tall above them in a loose print dress and scarf tied over her head to form 2 cat ears. Her slanted dark eyes flashed. Gosh, I'm going to miss it. Come on, you guys are so ungrateful. She spread out her arms. I mean, look at this house and listen to all of you griping about servants. I'll give $100 to anyone who can point to houses like this and servants back in Kansas or wherever you came from. No one spoke. A chill had settled over them.
Gorgeous. I love this. Wow, you do dialogue so well. Is that something that you work on, or is it innate? I know you have a theater background.
Yeah, I was going to say it's kind of innate because I love plays and I read plays actually for pleasure, and I've acted in them, directed them. So I really love dialogue. Any chance I get, I throw in some dialogue and some drama.
And do you find it works well with the novel form, or are you, when you're working with the editor, do they tell you to pare back dialogue, or it's something that you're encouraged to do?
Actually, I'm encouraged to do it. There were areas where I had not written a dialogue, and they said, you know, this would be more effective if you had a dialogue. Of course, there was one long monologue that I had that my editor looked and said, you know, I think some of this should be an internal thing because it's hard to believe somebody would talk that long. And I said, yeah, I agreed. And so we pared that down. But for the most part, they said dialogue was really a strong thing I had.
Because with theater, a monologue would work, obviously, when you have somebody stand on stage and speak in his thoughts. Do you borrow a lot from this experience you had, apart from dialogue, and other things that help you with novel writing?
Oh, yes, because one of the things that I do is I always picture the scene in my head, almost like they are on stage and I've got the audience and I've got to let them do this. So I'm kind of indirectly directing them and, you know, their body movements, what they do, how they stand, the inflection of their voices. All of that comes to bear. So drama is something that I really find very helpful and I cultivate it.
It's telling that you said that, because even as you were reading that section, and readers will pick up the book and who should pick up the book will see, like, it feels like these are different sets. So we're on stage with this group right here, and then we remember when in the US, the different sets, like in the airport, or whether it's in the different houses that Lola goes through, like I can picture them as like, yeah, sits, and people come on screen or on stage and go off stage. So it's very interesting that you pointed that out. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Can we talk about Lola and her mother? This is also an interesting choice because her mother is off stage. If you can continue the theater analogy a little bit more, her mother is mostly off stage, and the interaction that she does have with her is so short, not to give anything away. Why do you make this choice to have her mother be so distant?
So that is what usually happens, especially in those days, the setting, the time that the book was set in, the period, there was no instant messaging, there was no WhatsApp, there was no, and we actually joke about this. If you're abroad and you wanted to make a phone call, if you were lucky and you had a phone in your house, there was just the one phone, and then you picked it up and then, you called the person. But oftentimes there wasn't even a phone in your own home. So you call the neighbor and you say, can you tell my aunt, my mother, I'm going to call at this time. But of course, Lola's mother being a judge, she has a phone in her house, except that in those days too, like I said, because we didn't have WhatsApp and FaceTime and all that, today I can call somebody in America and talk for hours and it won't cost me a penny. But in those days, you would buy a phone card, you scratch it, get a code, and it would cost you maybe about $10, $5, and depending upon how much you buy, you have only such a short time. So you don't have time to call and get somebody to go call someone who is not at home and that kind of thing. And also, if you're staying with somebody, and I imagine that during that time, Lola probably in a place like Frederick, in certain places, didn't even know where to find a phone card to call home. And so you're reduced to writing letters. And here's how letters used to work. You write a letter, and it could take up to 3 weeks for the letter to get to the recipient. Then you have to wait, assuming the person writes right away, which is not always the case, you have to wait another 3 weeks to get a reply. And sometimes it was even up to a month, sometimes 2 weeks. And so it's not easy to communicate. And so this was created to also show the distance, not just a physical distance, but the disconnectedness that you have within the culture. She's disconnected from her family, from her culture, from her country. And so that distance with letters that come in periodically, in fact, the letters are the only thing that are short reminders of home. But the letters also serve a purpose. We get to see the point of view of the family back home and what they think of people who have left. And in this particular case, we know how her mother feels about her having left. And ideally, her mother, in fact, wants her back. And so you get, and through the mother's letters, we also get to understand the culture that she left behind and the things that she's grappling with. And so it gives voice to the Africa that people don't know, and that people get to understand the Africa that she left behind through the mother and the sister. And
another technique that you use to bring this culture to the surface is the Adinkra symbols. Can you talk about your choice to use them? Because to tell you the truth, it's a mixture of two things. Like, A, I'm scared to use them because they're so precious almost, and then B, I'm scared to use them because they're everywhere at the same time. But I love the way you had each chapter of your book begin with an Adinkra symbols, I guess, translation. Oh no, you had the symbol itself, and then you had the name of it, and then the translation. And then within the story, we would find beautiful interpretations of each symbol. Sometimes it'll be just like the expression itself, or sometimes it'll be some twisted thing, and you're like, oh, that calls back this symbol that began the chapter. Can you talk about how you did it all? It was so intriguing to me.
So that is something that came to me in the latter part of, I didn't do that in 2008 when I first wrote, but I did use some of it. But I think what happened was that living abroad, I always took Adinkra symbols for granted. Then when I was an international affairs specialist, I had to come to Ghana with a bunch of American educators. And one of the things that our host did was to take us to that town where they make kente, bonre, where they make the kente, where they weave it, and also where they make the Adinkra symbols, where they put it in cloth. And we actually all had pieces of fabric to work with, and we had to make stamps. And then as I did that, I realized that, wait a minute, I had no idea we had such a big variety of symbols. And I had no idea what they meant, what they stood for, and why. And so, you saw how at the end of the book, it all comes together when she finally—
Can you tell us about why, for people who have no idea what Adinkra
So the
symbols
word
are?
Adinkra actually, it's actually a word that means to say goodbye. And those were apparently, now according to my research, there was a particular king who died. And before he died, he left these symbols, these nuggets of wisdom as something to live by. And I knew that in Ghana, everybody knew one that was Jinyami, and that means, unless God, only by the grace of God, if you want to go to a deeper interpretation, really means only by the grace of God. And people had all these symbols. But it was when I was in America that when I came to Ghana, from America, that I thought, oh my God, so we lived with this rich culture and we had no idea the importance of these symbols. And so I started to study them. And as I studied them, I said, you know what, I'm going to put these symbols in my book, in the book, because those symbols are going to be something that my character, Lola, reflects on while she is in America. She's making connections because now we realize that her mother must have been teaching her about these symbols. Her mother was using the symbols. And I made her Asante because the symbols actually started with the Akan people, with the Asante people. And of course, now it belongs to all of Ghana, and even some Africans have also
I've seen them on the gate over here in Senegal.
And even African Americans, I think they use the Jinyami in the celebration of Kwanzaa. It's one of them. Yes, but for me it was, and I remember I had bought this art, the Sankofa art, and I used to watch it all the time, and the egg in its mouth, and the Sankofa bird is, her neck is so long, it's curved over, and she's got this egg. And so when I investigated, I came to understand that the egg was something that she had laid and left behind. And she realized that without the egg, she would not, her future was going to be over. She needed her future. And so I understood the Sankofa and the idea of going back to pick up what you've left behind. So all that became very beautiful. And I just started to weave them, all these symbols, into the novel. And I give kudos to HarperCollins for actually buying rights to use the symbols and actually buying the tree font. We are never always lucky to have the actual spelling. I insisted on the correct spelling instead of using E for air and the proper tree alphabet, and they were able to do that. So this novel is so precious to me because they honored our roots, our Ghanaian roots, our African tradition. They showcased its value, and I really, really love it.
So talking about your traditions being honored,
By series.
Sorry.
I'm giving instructions and it's saying one moment. I have no idea what it is. Go on, please.
No, I was just going to say, you've come back from the US on tour. So you're taking this book that is so precious to you, and you're taking it to an audience that might see itself in the book or might not. What was the reaction? Like, how did the book tour go? And what have you heard about the book so far?
It went so well. I was pleasantly surprised. As a matter of fact, because of the pandemic, we have not had a lot of, physical appearances. And HarperCollins was actually electing not to do any physical appearances, but I really wanted to do it. My first event was actually virtual. And to my surprise, we had 200 people log in virtually, and they hung with us. And how when you have an event, you kind of get people come in and out. And I would say it hovered between 206 and 198 consistently until the end. And then, there was another virtual event, which was the Brown Girl Collective, because I wasn't going to that stage. But to my utter surprise, the one in Brooklyn, for instance, we had considered actually canceling because I wasn't sure that people would come. And they filled the room and all books sold out and all the physical events went very, very well. My last event at George Mason was standing room only. And it was also so refreshing to see many Ghanaians show up. I only knew 3 people in the audience, so that I had invited, and it was just full. And the books were snatched just like that. They ran out. They ran out in Brooklyn. They ran out in DC. Everywhere they ran out. I think the only place where we didn't run out, funnily enough, was the Africa Center, where because of the time too, it was like 5 p.m. right after work. We didn't get as big a crowd, but even then, I was surprised at how many we were able to. The organizers were able to sell. So it was very successful.
It's interesting to me that when you started off writing this when you tried selling it in 2010, the response is a muted one, like no. And so much time, like 13 years later, now your books are flying off the shelves. What do you think has changed? Is the same immigrant story that you were telling, you didn't really change the story. What is it about us as a people or about your audience that has made them more receptive, starting with the publishing house and then the bigger audience?
I don't think that the audience has changed much. I think publishers make decisions for audiences. They assume people will not be interested. A case in point, I belonged to an online workshop with about 10,000 members. And my story was just being read like that. In fact, it got alarming because people were printing and somebody would reach out to me, Daughter in Exile. Okay. I started it off with an online group and people would reach out to me, somebody in Switzerland. Oh, I downloaded it and shared it with my wife. Oh, I downloaded it and I was getting alarmed. And people kept going, oh, this is wonderful. These were people I didn't know. It was just an online group. And as I said, they had about 10,000 people. And it was, everybody was going, oh, this is going to be a bestseller. One particular woman who lived in the DC area, she said, she was so upset. She said, you're keeping me up. I'm not sleeping. I had to read. I'm you to thankful. People would start reading and they would read 10 chapters at a time. And some would finish within 2-3 days and all that. So the reception from the audience, I don't think has changed. I think what it is that publishers, publishers like something that has been tried. So once Chimamanda's Americana was highly successful, and that, she also won awards and all that, suddenly they thought, oh, okay, I guess we should publish immigrant stories. So they started to publish more stories about immigration, like Dominicana and so many other stories since then. So it's kind of bittersweet because unfortunately, sometimes the publishers make decisions, they make assumptions based on their own judgment. They will write and say, we loved it, but we're not sure it will do well with an American audience. They make assumptions. And they're not willing to take a chance until somebody has taken a chance. I mean, mind you, by the time Chimamanda published Americana, she was already now a household name. She had published Purple Hibiscus. She had won the Orange Prize for Half of a Yellow Sun. So she had a huge platform. And so, you know, it did well, and it did better than they thought it would. It did better than the two previous books. So then they were more open to it. So, yeah.
And do you think this is like a specific thing to the African immigrant experience? I'm trying to think about other books. I think like Junot Diaz's book did really well. This was in the early, when did he write his book? The Brief and Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. And there were other books from people from like the Caribbean. There's an Irish writer. There are lots of Irish writers who have their books do very well.
Yeah.
So is this like a specific
I think
thing
of
to African
Angela's
writing?
Ashes and all that. I think that when it comes to Africa, they like to pigeonhole us. And I'll tell you something. One of the things that I got when Daughter in Exile, when I was being turned out, some of these publishers, I remember one particular woman from St. Martin's who had fallen in love with the earlier with you know the first two chapters, and she said this, I thought I was going to get more of the African culture. What do you mean by African culture? Because for them, and they would actually, somebody actually said this to me, you know, Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. Hello, that was set in when? Was it pre-colonial days and all that? If you're expecting an Africa where we're sitting around breaking cola and we are all wrestling and wearing loincloths and doing nothing else but hunting for food and all that, well, that Africa, I mean, it exists, but is rapidly diminishing. They were not willing to accept an Africa that was different from, so they like to pigeonhole. And I remember when this gentleman's book, the Uwem Akpan wrote, Say You're One of Them. Now, that book was about children in peril and war and murder and just senseless violence. Now, I'm glad that his book sold and his book was well written, but those were the kind of stories that they were interested in. If it wasn't about slavery, if it wasn't about the African hunter, the woman cooking and all that, or catching chickens and, you know, really village life, not just village life, but pre-colonial life, then they were not interested. They thought that was what represented Africa. And so one of the things that they said to me was, oh, but you are describing somebody who is wealthy and who is doing this. Well, we're not used to that. That's not what we want. And it was really interesting to me. What do you mean? You know, and I remember when during the time I was being rejected left and right, while I was still struggling and wondering what to do, that was when Yajasi's book, Homegoing, sold for $1 million or something to that effect. And it was a book set during the time of slavery. And it seemed as though, mind you, I was thrilled for her because, you know, she's my Ghanaian sister. And I thought, oh my God, finally, we also have, and at that time, sadly, I didn't even know anything about your work. And I just thought, oh my God, thank God we now have a Ghanaian, a major writer from Ghana. And I said, yes, girl, take them for all their money, because if slavery is what they want, give it to them, collect your money. And, you know, the other part of me was also bitter. Like, really, is this the only way you see us? If we're not suffering, if we're not barefoot and hungry and war-torn and being I don't know, mutilated left and right, is that the only thing that we are good for? And I found that, just as you said, I had read books like Angela's Ashes and all these other books written by people from different parts of the world. That was okay, but it was not okay if it came from Africa, if it didn't fit into that preconceived narrative. And that I did resent very much.
Well, I think we have only a few minutes left. Bisi, can you make your screen bright? I don't know if it's anything to do with brightening your screen, but we had a message
okay.
here.
Let me see. I don't know what happened.
I don't know if it's going to change or if it's just a Ghana. You know, it gets dark in Ghana.
Oh, that's what it is. It's getting dark. So let me brighten
closer to the equator.
Let me brighten the screen. Yeah. Is it better now?
Well,
and also, you know what? Let me also turn on some lights because you are right.
If anybody has questions, now will be the time to type them in.
Yes, hold on.
Otherwise, I'll continue talking to Bisi. And then, yeah, we have a few minutes left. Much better.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. What happened was the sun suddenly set and then it went down. Yes.
So quickly. There we go.
I'm sorry. Hello,
much better now.
Yes.
I have a question. We started talking about some books. I like to think as writers, like whether we're conscious of this or not, our works are in conversation with other books. So were there books that you read that inspired this book, or other books that you think this book would be a companion book to? One book that came to mind for me in particular was Buchi Emechete's In the Ditch, which is almost like your story, but set in an earlier time, and a woman who goes to the UK. But I think those two books read in tandem would be very interesting. But I'd love to hear what books inspired you or could be read.
I mean, I have so many writers that inspire me, but in this particular instant though, when I was writing, honestly, I had no idea there were other books like it. So I just was writing all by my lonesome until and I think that's the reason why I keep mentioning Americana. It was the only one that I knew later that came from Africa. So I'm trying to think. I think of this book, Patsy, which it's set partly in Jamaica and in America. And I think although I had finished writing this before I read it, I think that it is in a way, it can be a companion. It's a different kind of woman. And again, somebody who chooses to do away with motherhood and strike out on her own in a foreign country. And she too comes in with expectations based on romance. And the romance, things kind of fall apart a little. And then, she has all this going on in her life. And she too is forced to move from place to place. And there's a different kind of resolution. So yeah, I think of Patsy. And I also think of this book, Dominicana, which I haven't read, but people have spoken to me about, and they said, oh, this really fits in with it. And so I just, that is what I would say I can compare the book to. But I have to say that at the time I was writing, I was kind of writing in the dark. And I wasn't aware of other books that were similar coming up, so yeah.
I mean, there are echoes for me, and it's not even they're being similar, but just like if you want more, if you want to have something that, what's the word I'm looking for? It's complementary. Like this is the kind of book that you can read. So I was just curious about that. But we have a question maybe from Ndegwa. Do you want to tell us directly or to type it?
Yes.
Okay, here
we
go.
This has been amazing. I'm thinking about what you've just said concerning the state of affairs when it comes to African writing. I'm recalling an interview that Taye Selassie did where she said that she regrets heavily that in an unfortunate turn of events, and I think that's maybe historically, African novels have to be answerable to some sort of political question, whereas a book could simply be about a family struggling and going through something, and that's it. Sure, maybe the background could be sometime in history, but that shouldn't be the main focus on what is driving the story to move forward. I think about this in line with novels I see of people my age. What's coming to mind is a book that came from the UK last year titled Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies, and her name is Maddie Mortimer, and she's my age. I think about that book and the breadth of story and the kind of allowances that non-African writers are allowed, that they're given. I think of this book and the fact that the setting of the book was primarily a woman's body. And one thing that I ask myself, and I've been having this conversation with friends lately, is there any hope for us? Because I remember a white man walking into a bookstore, and he told me and a friend of mine who writes that he's trying to experiment with realism, and I don't know what sort of realism he was speaking of, but we looked at him and I actually told him, oh, what a privilege to experiment like that. Because I would say I'd like to write a novel that takes place in someone's head from beginning to end. But what is it about that is seen as lesser political, considering Toni Morrison says the act of writing is political? What then makes those kinds of experimentations, especially from young African writers, invalid?
That is such an excellent point. A case in point, when I wrote The Teller of Secrets, which is originally Of Women and Frogs, there was no political anything anywhere in it at all, except to explain why, she grew up, while she was born in Nigeria, why her mother was in Nigeria, because her father had escaped to Nigeria during Nkrumah's time. Then Scribner, at the time, that wanted to buy the novel, the editor actually called me and said, and she is a Caucasian woman married to a Black person. And she said, I'm going to tell you something. It's hard to get published as an African. So why don't you throw in some politics? And I was resistant. I said, I'm not going to do it. However, I remembered something that happened to me. And I started to think, oh, okay. So then I started to research the time, the historical period in which I set the book. And I was surprised to find things that I didn't know about. For instance, I had only a vague idea that the women, the Makola women, the market was bombed. And I did not know that women were the target. The idea that women were blamed for the economy. And so I started doing all this research, and then I suddenly thought, oh my God, these are all feminist issues that I can weave in, and also explain why she changes courses and she does this, then she goes to Nigeria at this time and that kind of thing. So that came out of my research. So I embraced it. But initially, I was very upset about it. Well, in this particular instance, I was determined not to bring in politics. This is just a family saga about a girl and being estranged or being in self-exile away from her family. And think about a book like one of the books that I have enjoyed reading, The Confessions of a Shopaholic. It's just this girl, a British girl who likes to spend money. The whole story is about her spending money and getting into trouble and trying to outwit the creditors. And guess what? It was a runaway bestseller. I have to say, I enjoyed it very much so, and it's been made into a movie. But if an African woman wrote that kind of story, I'm willing to bet you that it would not be published. And this is the thing that there is something in the psyche of American publishing that does not see the African as I would like to say it's not intentional, but it does not see the African as just a whole human, just that, you know, and which is why I think, and they have been surprised. We have Leye Adenle, who's writing crime fiction, and his crime fiction is doing very well, and is showing people that in fact Africans have their own, you know, brand of writing detective books. And I absolutely and love the fact that Oyinkan Braithwaite wrote My Sister the Serial Killer. And again, it surprised the Western world how well it did. And so they need to understand that we have things to offer. Nnedi Okorafor is writing fantasy, and her fantasy is doing so well. You know, it's in movies. They're making movies out of her work. Tomi Adeyemi is doing well with her Children of Blood and Bone. So we have all this, and they need to allow us to be human and to just write human stories. Sure, if you feel like writing political stories, by all means do that, but we shouldn't feel as though it's the only way we can be successful, you know. So, I mean, I am working on a historical piece that is very political, but I'm doing it because it's something I'm choosing to do. It's a story I have wanted to tell from since I was a little girl. So that's different. But the idea that, and of course, I'm writing it at a time where I don't need to write something like that to get published, because I mean, at some point, you've more or less become a proven author. You don't have to do that. So, you know, I'm doing it because I'm choosing to, but the idea that we have to do that is very upsetting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of writers are also African writers are beginning to take risks and to do what they love and what they want to do, and the world just has to catch up. It's a pity we don't have our own publishing houses. There was an interesting piece this week by Petina Dapa, and that was talking about a group of writers that came up around the same time, Chimamanda, Binyavanga Wenene, and Petina Dapa, and a few others. And they had this statement where they said, the audience is Africa, but the market is in the West. And it still rings true today, sadly. So until the day we can publish our own stories, we're still stuck in that dynamic where we're writing for African audiences, but where the money comes from is not here. So, yeah.
Exactly. I was going to mention the money. Oftentimes, we are forced to do that because to make a living is very hard. African publishers are not making enough, and they are not paying authors well enough. And so we go where the money is.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's tie up nicely. Just tell us what's coming up next, and then if people have more questions,
I have to keep it very close to my heart. So
okay.
I have to keep this one under wraps. Yes, but I hope to get something maybe out by April or something like that. Not out as in publishing, but out as in going
of your body.
out of my body, out of my head, and into the hands, hopefully, of my publisher, who is actually impatiently asking me. When I went to New York, one of the things I got to do was to visit HarperCollins headquarters, and the first thing was they sat me down and said, when is your third book coming? And this is a nice privilege to have now. There was a time when you write and you're begging, just even read my work, and they don't want it. And now it's like, when is your third book coming? So that's nice to have now.
Very nice. Okay, thank you so much, Bisi. We have a question. When and where will the book be available in Ghana?
So the books are coming from, okay, right now I have a few limited copies that was, my copies from the publisher. It was my contract copies. So I've been sort of doling them out little by little for people who actually come to me and ask for them. They're hardcover editions. They're a little more pricey, but Reader Books bought West Africa rights. And the book is already at the printers, and with a gorgeous, gorgeous cover, and it's coming out. So by the end of this month, the books will be in Ghana and it will be available. So yeah, we hope so.
Beautiful. Well, any other questions for Bisi while we have her, and then we can let her go. Well, thank you so much, and congratulations on the beautiful book.
Thank you.
Can't wait to read some more. So Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
Cheche
Cheche
Books. You've
Yeah.
been amazing. Thank you for your support. Thank you for amplifying the voices of African writers. I really appreciate what you're doing. And I can't wait for the day I come to Kenya and show up at Cheche Books. I mean, I will be just posing and showing off. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Ayesha. I'll see you in a few
Bye.
days.
See you very soon.
Yeah.
That's
Bye.
good. All righty. Everyone have a good evening.
You too, you all. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Oh, leave.
Aisha, thank you so much.